I'm Lauren Bradley, and today we're going to be exploring the topic of shifting left. Specifically, how the culture and technology changes as web application and API protection becomes a native and inherent part of your DevOps lifecycle. Let's start off with a shocking statistic from Honeyman Institute. Today, it takes most companies more than 200 days to even detect a breach. And if you're not detecting a breach quick enough, it's going to cost you big. IBM found that the cost to fix bugs found during the testing stage can be 15 times more than those found during design. So to put it simply, the longer you wait to catch a problem, the more it's going to cost you. And we're not just talking about money. The rework, the time, the energy can ultimately shift back product roadmaps. So how can you effectively shift left and avoid wasting valuable resources and stalling your progress? Joining us today, we have Michael Grimshaw, Edgeo's Director of Platform Engineering, and Richard Yu, Senior Director of Product Management for the Edgeo Security Platform. Welcome, Michael and Richard. It's great to have you on.
Thank you, Lauren. Great to be here.
Thank you.
Can you guys...
And likewise.
Can you tell me a little bit about yourselves and your initial thoughts on this topic? Mike, we'll start with you.
Absolutely. First of all, let me start off by just thanking you, Lauren, for having such an interest in this very important topic, and you're digging in and ramping up, and the conversations we have had and are having around this, including this one here, is just an invaluable and imperative to the work that we're doing in the industry. This understanding needs to be shared far and wide, and really appreciate the interest. My name is Michael Grimshaw. I'm the Director of Platform Engineering here at Edgeo. For those of you who aren't super familiar with platform in industry terms, it is really thinking in terms of the unification of your applications and infrastructure into coherent units. And I have a security I come to platform with a heavy security background, and this is an area that I'm pretty passionate about because it moves the needle in such a big way as far as security, as far as profitability, and so many of the areas that are so important to our industry. And I can go on around DevSecOps, but let me hand it over to Richard for his intro.
Thank you very much, Michael. Yes. This is a very important topic. It's very near and dear in my heart because I personally have lived through the entire software development lifecycle process, and as well as translating those to the business. Now, speaking of what I do, obviously as Lauren mentioned, so I run our security product management organizations in Edgeo. So my day-to-day life involves working with the R&D team, the engineering team, to actually ensure that we're delivering value to our customers. And everything that obviously would includes optimizing our development practice, our secure CI/CD practice, to ensure that we are actually be able to deliver a secure product, right, that actually provides value to our customers, deliver them on time, on budgets, and ensures that we provide great experience to our customers. So my lens in this is to really look at the entire DevSecOps, from a perspective of people, process, as well as the technology, and how we can actually implement the best practice for the industry.
To your point, Richard, let me steal the ball there, if you don't mind, and just I think let's just standardize on what we mean by DevSecOps and shift left, shift right. There was Gartner. Here's the thing. For some people listening in on this, DevSecOps and the term shift left, shift right, etc., might sound relatively new. This is not a new, it's not like, the newest, hottest thing that just hit a year ago. No, this has been baking in the industry for quite a while. And in fact, Gartner had a report from 2017. The DevSecOps lifecycle was just really an extension of the DevOps, the DevOps trend in the industry, just extending to include security in the InfoSec into the feedback loop in your software development lifecycle. And so, like I said, Gartner was writing about this back in 2017, and it had already been a process and a movement in the industry for quite a while before that. So these aren't brand new concepts. It's just an extension of what we have been working to for years. And effectively, what DevSecOps is it takes the similar model of DevOps, in that you have a development side and really an operations side. And at the crux, it is building in all of your security needs as soon as possible. I mean, from the onset of design, build, the whole process, to where your developers on the and shift left is on the development side. Excuse me. Shift right is more on the operations and observability side. We're going to focus on the shift left side here today. But it is basically baking in your testing, your scans, your validation as early, as far left, and as early in the development lifecycle, your SDLC as possible. So, for example, one of the things that it talks about, and again, this goes back 7 years plus, is things like having security scanning your open source third-party libraries, repositories, code base, as well as the code that you write, the design, the architecture, the whole nine yards, and baking that in from the very onset. And like one of the examples I've been giving is building in security scanning into the very IDEs that your developers use. It's just one example, and there's lots of them. So that as they're writing their code, they get immediate feedback. Oh, I just left the door open to credential stuffing or SQL injection, and they get, just like a syntax error, they get a security error right there as they're writing the code, so they can immediately fix that, so they don't have a customer complaining about the customer or end user getting pawned, a month later. No, it's handled right there, cheapest, fastest, easiest at the onset. Yeah. Richard, you were going to say something?
Oh yeah. Like I think the cost is actually very important to talk about. Everybody knows a lot of operating costs. Any organizations, it's like the development, right? The R&D process. So when it comes to cost, this is why is shifting left more important, right? Because we're putting a lot of effort in talking about the why. I'm sure we're going to go into the how later, but we want to hit home on the reason why this is so important, because we have data that according to our research shows that if you are fixing a security vulnerability that was found after you release your code in productions, costs 15 times more than when it's found in a design phase when you're doing threat modeling. Obviously, we're not saying that the early phase of the development effort would completely catch all the security vulnerability. This is why we need to implement defense in depth. But it's very important that as you look at the 8 phases, in general of the DevSecOps life cycles, from plan, code, build, test, all the way to monitor and operate, right? You look at them, the further right you go, when you find a security vulnerability, the more costly it's going to take, for your organizations to actually fix the issues. So we're talking about the difference between, finding a vulnerability on a scan that happens after you already release a bunch of code to the productions, versus say, doing a dynamic application security task in a staging environment to actually detect it early before you ship that code to the productions, right? You might be able to you either remediate those issues, or you implement some sort of virtual patchings that right ahead of time before you release the code to production to mitigate that. But again, it's very important to understand that security needs to be baked in for the first step of the process, even before you start writing the code, before you put anything down into your IDE. Start doing threat modeling. Ensure, hey, what part of the design could potentially be susceptible to exploit?
Yeah, and those are really good points, you guys. I mean, from a user standpoint, I mean, what outside of costs monetarily, what can that mean for a DevOps or a security team to experience in their day-to-day if they aren't implementing this right from the get-go? And I also want to talk about how we effectively implement it into the DevOps lifecycle.
Great question. Yeah, and let me just be really blunt in my initial response. Is Everyone in the industry, every CEO, CTO, CFO, everyone in engineers, users, what we all want is just a magic bullet that we can do, what we do day to day. And then we have a magic security bullet that you just flip the switch and all of your work is suddenly made secure. That's what everyone wants, but that's not reality. That is, when people ask like that, I want to ask them, how's the weather in Fantasyland? I hear it's nice this time of year. And if you approach your security, your InfoSec, as well as your development, as this is just a bolt-on, I'm going to buy some tools that I'm going to bolt on after we've got everything developed and built and deployed, and it's going to go on and make everything secure. You're buying a very expensive paperweight, to be honest with you. And this is why, it was mentioned, it's about people's processes and tooling. This is why the coherent totality of this approach is so important. We are far, years, decades, if it ever was even possible, to be honest with you, we've learned a lot of lessons. That idea of you just design something and you put a security tool in and you're good to go, it impacts everything from your costs to your developer velocity and cost there to your customers. And a great example of this is, my suspicion is, almost everyone who's listening at some point in their career been in a situation where a new feature or a new service or something like that, or even just a patch and update was deployed. Everything seems good, everything's running good, and then suddenly you get a call from one of your customers, or InfoSec gets a call from one of the customers. We've just been pawned, or we've just had a security incident, or something like that. And the reason is because, okay, you deployed it, but maybe the scans hadn't finished running, or you didn't do scans, or you didn't have them properly tuned, and you have just introduced a massive security vulnerability. Maybe it affects you, but more importantly, it affects your customers. DevSecOps, about baking all of this together in a coherent process, is about avoiding that. It's about cost cutting, absolutely. Is it about improving margins? Oh, in a big way. But it's also about removing the liability for your company and that of your customers.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking about baking it, Mike used such a term like coherent totality. Like this is so true. Like this is a very powerful word to show like why is this important to like have that baked in place. Like I'm known within Agile to be the analogy guys. I like to throw a bunch of analogy around, and I heard this great analogies. I think would be serve as strong foundation towards like pushing for the right cultures within any organization. As we all know, as security people, a big part of our job is evangelism. It's not just about implementing right technologies and creating a process, but also really doing a lot of like internal marketing to tell people the importance of security to the business, right? Because it's as security leaders, it's not just like like people often think of security like adding additional layers of process into your workflow, but like the right way of thinking about this is that how can security accelerate the business? How can security actually bring in more like revenue? Because like this is a good way for justifying a lot of the security, additional security implementations that you have to do to ensure the organization is secure. So one of the analogy I heard that was great is that, security shouldn't be treated like an icing on the cake. You know how you bake out of the cake and you just put all the icings as the last step? That's usually what people do when they don't have a secure CI/CD workflow and they just implement firewalls and, API protections, whatever, at the last phase, in the production phase. Well, like what it should be, the security, is like flour. It should have been something from the beginning. Security is like a flowers for you to bake the cake. And then when security are done right, you can't see it. And the whole point of security is when it's done right, it should have been baked in and is not visible. It should not be something that creates challenge. It should not be something that slows the organization down. Like another analogy is that I use to help show the business why this is important is that having a strong security process, security technology like cultures, it's kind of like having a strong brakes in a race car. Why every supercar out there has a big, really big fancy brakes? It allows them to corner faster. It allows them to brake hard. It allows them to go faster and turn harder, right? It allows them to win the race. So having a strong brake is as important as having a strong engines, right? This is how we should be looking at security on a philosophical way. Obviously, we talk a lot about high levels, right? So we obviously want to, kind of like go deeper into like the gist of like, okay, so all of this is fine, but how exactly are we gonna implement that, right?
Yeah.
I think that's a great call out. Is breaking the powerful braking gives you control. Because the road we have ahead is filled with curves, hairpin turns, and all of that. And there's straightaways where you floor and you don't touch the brakes, but to navigate everything, that brake, I love both of those analogies, Richard, because that braking analogy, it gives you control. It gives you finer grained control when you're facing curves, challenges, and unexpected things. Yeah. Great call.
By the way, like I want to clarify, I didn't come up with that analogy. It's from this guy called Dr. Eric Koh. He runs a great podcast, so I recommend everybody to like go watch that. But yes, I find it so appropriate when explaining like the concept to the business, especially who's new to this kind of concept.
And I apologize, Lauren. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No worries. This is great. Richard, you talk about how you mentioned, if DevSecOps is done right, you don't see it. And obviously one of those glaring visibilities is cost. It's also siloed teams. It also feels like there's a disconnect between teams when there are these issues that arise, and why weren't they caught before? What processes, what communication wasn't taken place in order to resolve these quickly or effectively? So my question to you is, in your experience, which of, there's probably a lack of transparency, there's slow decision making, there's potential to waste resources when you have siloed teams. What problems tends to be the most problematic when teams do operate in silos, in your opinion?
Yeah, I'll take this one. I think one thing that I personally experienced in my past life, right, is that and this is when when we talk about like products, like kind of planning, it's important. Is that sometimes you have a security team who's not kind of embedded within the R&D, like within the CTO organization. Sometimes in many organizations, we observe silos between security team and like the CTO organization. Is that you find that a lot of process was done after the fact. So for examples, we run into situations where we release a lot of products, release a lot of codes, because there's just not a strong kind of like communication collaborations between the security team and engineering teams. What ended up is that organization must be compliant. Sometimes the specific examples is that you have team coming in doing the scans like once or twice a year. What's the result of those scans? Well, I'll be told, hey, Richard, we got to slow down next quarter because we just found like 100 different big and small security bugs. Like maybe like 20, like of the top 20 are like severity 1 and 2 and above. While like the rest, but you got to focus on fixing these things. And there's an SLA within the organization for you to fix. What ended up happening is that by doing that, you essentially just took my roadmap and you just throw them off to the next quarter. So by not shifting left, by not really baking this process in place, by just doing these things only on the right side, we're essentially pushing our roadmap, which is revenue generating deliverables. Potentially that could help expand our business. We're gonna have to like potentially move it right, so that we can actually like spend at quarters trying to like after the fact like to mitigate those issues. This is why I say it's tremendously expensive for the organization and for the business to imagine having to shift a roadmap items up by a quarter. So all of your release schedules of your new products, features, functionalities has to be shifted right, because you didn't shift left into your practice. And some of those things like could have been improved with better collaborations between like especially application security teams within an organization and the development team. This is why like we see that many organizations are starting to have this new concept. You guys heard about HRBP, HR business partners that embedded within different business unit. There's now a concept of application security, like BP. So you're going to start hearing these terms like AppSec BP. that could become practice where you have people working almost like a semi-embedded manner of the engineering team to ensure that they provide the right guidance, tools, and processes in each step of development workflow, from say implementing software composition analysis, implementing secure IDE, implementing like all the black and white box tests during the process, to ensure that we're able to capture some of those issues before right early in the development life cycle.
And I love everything. Great question, Lauren. And I love everything you just said, Richard, because there's a cost associated with that. If someone is in a product where they hear, wait, if I shift left, I don't have to shift my roadmap right. That's music to their ears. But for like maybe CFOs or even operations or other areas of the business, you might be saying, okay, well, what's the impact of that? The impact is huge. You just kneecapped your sales department. You have impacted your customers because you've got, especially when it comes to security, lots of customers. I know on the platform side, when I talk to my vendors, I want to know what the roadmap is because, okay, maybe I have to go to my auditors and I need to get compensating control until you release something on your roadmap. Well, if you just told me, okay, what I was expecting to be delivered in a quarter is going to be 3 quarters, I'm going to start looking at other vendors. Why? Because I have obligations to my auditors that I have to meet. And I also love, Richard, you brought up you brought up auditors and really the compliance process. That's another example here. To your point, Lauren, about where siloization can radically blow things up. If you're in the middle of a PCI, SOC, ISO, FedRAMP, any of these various compliance frameworks, and you haven't really integrated, you're still operating in a silo mentality, you're probably going to have someone who's in compliance or InfoSec talking to your auditors. They're going to have to translate that through a layer or two to the engineering side that hopefully is going to implement it intended. And then that's just to get it implemented. And then all the evidence and the scanning and everything that you need to provide back to your auditors. Good luck if that actually translates through. We've all played, that old rumor game from elementary school. It's a similar type function where if you've got integrated teams that are working with the auditors, that are immediately know how to translate this into specific technology, and you've got scanning, and you can turn that immediately around and put it in your rule set and scan and validate on that, both real time as well as when you're meeting with the auditors. You've got all your evidence all together right there. That is a radical game changer. It allows you to deliver things faster to your customers instead of, like Richard said, keep shifting your roadmap right.
Yeah. So to be more tangible on that, how can CISOs and AppSec leaders quantify their metrics to understand cost implications or even just general success?
It's funny, we talk a lot about the why and the what, but let's dive deeper into the how, because I know that that's what a lot of our audience for. We're not here to give you fluffy high level statements. We're here to hopefully provides a bit of value when it comes to exactly how to implement that. So maybe we can pop out the DevSecOps chart, the nice one that we have, and then we can kind of just go through how we can optimize the steps. All right. So as you can see, traditional security testing is, kind of runs in a linear fashions, right? It's kind of when we're talking about waterfall, you have plan, you have build, you have test, right? A lot of time, security testing was done, during the operate and monitor phase. So on the right side. So now that the new concept is, if we moved on to the next pictures, right, is that and you can find 100 different variety of this chart. When you just Google DevSecOps today, it's not like Mike said earlier. This concept has been around 7 years, right? Some organization might not call it DevSecOps. Some organization just call it AppSec, right? So certain organization will call them a secure CI/CD pipeline. So this is a rough representation of what a secure CI/CD pipeline stands for, right? So from the start, you have on the planning phase, right? You have the threat modeling, threat analysis. You try and ensure that you baked in all of this modeling while you're designing a solutions. So as you code, as you go into the second phase, your coding phase, right? You want to make sure you have the hooked. You want to make sure that you have secure IDE who's able to really in real time, as developers writing the code, actually capture some of the issues in real time. Obviously, that's not silver bullets, right? But it's an additional layers, and we're talking about additional layers in the defense in depth cycles. Now, so as we move further and further down the deployment process, right? Once you commit the code, right, you want to make sure you have a process who's able to provide a static scan of all of your code to ensure that they check all the dependency, the supply chain, vulnerability, etc., along with software composition analysis to create a software bill of materials that show you, hey, what kind of version of software you're using, how old are they? Because, I kid you not, I just read a statistic a week or two ago. 25% of the downloads of Apache Log4j is still off the older version that still contains a vulnerability. It baffles me that it's still a stats, now that we're almost 2 years, I don't know, was it 2 years or 3 years from when the first Log4j 0 days vulnerability was announced back in early December, was it 2021? So it's really something that we need to focus on, like doing better and having this kind of software composition analysis in place to ensure that you know exactly what version of software you're running is important. So then, like that, then we move towards like testings, right? You want to make sure you have internal tests, you have your dynamic tests, implemented to ensure that we are able to test the application that's running and see if there's any vulnerability that can be exploited. Like this is usually done through fuzzing. Now, what is not shown here in the traditional DevSecOps cycles, because like this all looks pretty standard industry practice, right? As we move right all the way to deploy, monitor, response. Historically, you would put web application firewall, bot managers, API securities, but all of the web application API protection solutions on the response and the monitor phase, right? This is when you monitor your production traffic, you ensure that there's no exploit towards. But what do you like? It's something to consider is to actually move some of these web application API protections that you have in place, shift them left as well. Put them on, in this case, in the picture, say step 4. Put them on the testing phase. As you are doing your dynamic application security test, right? Why don't you test them through your production security mechanism? So you know actually how much of a vulnerability exists within the code, how many of those vulnerability can be mitigated. Because the important thing is that we're always trying to find ways to improve this current DevSecOps cycles by actually making our development works faster. The general practice when you found a security vulnerability during dev tests is that you basically stop the train. You go back, right? You fix the code, you re-release them, you go through the 8 steps again. But what if I tell you that perhaps there's a way for you to say, hey, let's not stop the train. Let's keep the train going. Let's release that by having a kind of like additional test with security solutions in front of step 4 will allow you to know well ahead of time what to virtual patch in the production so that you don't have to stop your train. You keep your train going, you maintain your velocity, you release the code with the virtual patch in place to mitigate the vulnerability, and then you fix them in the next cycle, which will hopefully happen very quickly. This is also one of those ways, the innovative ways that we want, educate and work with our customers to try to improve the existing CI/CD, secure CI/CD workflow.
I love that, Richard. I love you calling the fact of pulling this into shift left. So to your point is if your game plan is, let's get this into production and then we'll worry about it, you're going to have problems. And have something that can mitigate, that can cover your backside, both through your development and deployment and operations process. I love what you called out there. And a similar analogy, I would say, would be like Chaos Monkey. Here's the thing. If you have Chaos Monkey working in production, and the only time that you're dealing with Chaos Monkey is when it is in production, you're going to have a horrible development and operational experience. You have to plan, design, and engineer for that well before it hits production. Otherwise, you're going to be in misery.
Yeah. And Lauren, to answer your earlier questions, like how do we measure success, right? Now that we just look at the whole DevSecOps cycle and how we can optimize them, what's best practice, right? Very quickly, right? We got to track the success. So obviously, you need to be able to quantify the success, right? So there are some of the metrics that could help. If you're security leaders and you're trying to measure the success of your application security programs, like one of the things that you can look at, it's also how much of the application coverage you have, right? So for example, do you have more than 95% of all of your applications or internet-facing applications across your organizations covered under the same process? Do you have the same standardized process covering, right? The everything, including software composition analysis, SAS test, DAS test, like web application API protections. Do you have those things in place? So keep tracking coverage. How often do you release, and how often do you have to roll back at what phase because of the security vulnerability that you detect? And how often do you have to roll back at production phase versus how often do you have to roll back during the code commit phase where you're doing static analysis? Because obviously rolling back at productions is going to be way more expensive than like going to fix the code after a bit of static code analysis, right? The other two stats you definitely want to measure, as Lauren alluded to earlier. The industry average mean time to detect, we call it MTTD, right, and issues is 200 days. So I believe with the right process, with the right shift left process, you can drastically cut down on the mean time to detect to much shorter. So try to start putting a metrics together to detect how long does it take from the disclosure of vulnerability to you detecting those vulnerability within your organizations. And also like implement mean time to response, right? MTTR, mean time to resolve, mean time to resolutions, right? The industry average is 70 days, right? 70 days after vulnerability being found, right? Exploited. It still takes average organizations 70 days to resolve that. But with this, start tracking how quickly can you resolve, like as soon as you found a vulnerable version of Log4j using your code in your software composition analysis, how quickly can you virtual patch them with a firewall? Or how quickly can you go and update your libraries to use a different software, right? So measuring that at a very mature organization. I've spoken with some organization who actually we're talking about 4 hours of mean time to resolve time for Log4j event. That's extremely impressive. And that speaks to the maturity of their DevSecOps processes. So I've seen all kind. I've seen customers, organization who has like weeks of or even months of mean time to resolve on critical issues like Log4j. So it's very important to keep those metrics in mind as you try to improve the process as a whole.
And there's some other KPIs I want to throw in here. Is that like on the platform side, when you're dealing with infrastructure or in many cases, anything engineering, cost has always been an important element here. But in the last few years with rising interest rates, the spigot is, as far as VC money and a lot of that really drying up. The name of the game in the rising interest rate environment is EBITDA. Are you profitable? And there's an aspect here. I love this technical. Clearly, director of platform engineering. I love the technical side. But especially in the last few years, a huge part of, if you're working in platform, like I said, infrastructure and things like that, the finance aspect and clarifying and providing feedback to your CFO as well as your CTO has become imperative. And so the KPIs around cost and revenue this is a huge important aspect here as well. And I just want to call out some of the things like this is, for example, on the revenue side, if you're sitting down with a red line discussion, if you've got a customer who's looking to buy your product, you're going to go through a security red line because security is on everyone's minds. And your customers are going to want to make sure they're protected. They're going to want to minimize their risk here. And if you come to them with like the old school mentality, oh yes, we develop things and then we make sure our InfoSec scans them and all that. I've been in plenty of red line discussions and contract discussions, and that simply does not fly anymore. The level of questionnaires and questionnaires from your customer's risk department and legal department has gone to a whole other level of details in the last 5 years, let alone 10 years. And being able to have a fully integrated shift left solution, have web application API protection. All of this, when you are talking to other people's lawyers, this moves the needle in a big way. What does that mean? It means it allows you to close deals faster. And one of the things, if you're not practicing shift left or you're just thinking InfoSec as an add-on, I'd encourage you to go back and look at your closing ratios and where they broke down and specifically look at the security redline discussions. Because these type of products too often are viewed as a cost center. They're not. they can unblock revenue and they can save you a huge amount of money. We covered a lot of the cost savings as far as internal costs. But there's revenue and EBITDA implications here that I think is important to call out, because that's where so many eyes are in this rising interest rate world.
That's an excellent point. Like I'm glad we kind of switch hats a little bit. Like put on my SDLC hats and you put on your business hat. This is great. I hope like all of the things that we shared, provides a bit of value to our audience here.
Yeah. Thank you both so much. I think that's a great note to end on. We have covered the importance of shifting left and how to effectively bake web application and API protection into the DevOps lifecycle. And of course, how to effectively measure success. Are there fewer false positives? What is your mean time to resolution? How quickly are you shipping software? And are you earning more revenue? All of these metrics are vital to a business's success. So I appreciate you both, Michael and Richard, for joining me today. It has truly been a pleasure.